That entry is wrong. Hester Boyle said it before she could convince herself not to. She was carrying an audit binder and a lukewarm cup of coffee she'd been nursing since midnight, and she had every intention of walking past Suite 7 without making eye contact with anyone inside. She had been successfully invisible in this building for 3 years. She was exceptionally good at it. The 5 experts at the conference table turned toward her in unison. Priscilla Dodd recovered first. She was the lead forensic accountant the Marchand family had retained, and her expression carried the particular confidence of someone who had never been corrected by a woman holding a coffee mug and a 3-ring binder at 1:30 in the morning. "I beg your pardon," Priscilla said. Hester nodded toward the projected spreadsheet on the wall. "Line 47. The conversion notation. You read it as a dollar figure." She adjusted her glasses. "It's a unit reference." Priscilla folded her hands on the table with the precision of someone performing patience. "The notation is standard, shorthand for a wire transfer amount. In modern accounting," Hester said, "in pre-digital private ledgers from that era, the same symbol functioned as a quantity marker. The dollar figure is in the column to the left." Nobody spoke. At the head of the table, Savio Marchand had not moved since she entered the room. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read, which was unusual, because Hester could read a room the way other people read menus. Quickly, accurately, without needing to be asked. Savio was 41, built with the kind of stillness that didn't come from patience but from practice. People in his world learned stillness early, or they didn't last long enough to matter. His legitimate holdings stretched through private equity firms, a freight logistics network, 2 regional banks, and a commercial real estate portfolio spanning 4 states. What lay beneath the legitimate surface was quieter, more organized, and considerably more feared. He did not raise his voice. He simply said, "Explain." Hester pointed to the ledger page on the screen. "Your team translated this as a $2.3 million transfer. It's actually a reference to 2,300 units of a commodity named 3 pages earlier. The dollar value of that commodity at the time of writing would have been closer to 11 million. One of the other experts leaned forward. 2 others exchanged glances. Priscilla's voice sharpened. "According to whom?" "According to the same notation system used in the 4 entries before this one that your team got right." Hester paused. "The 5th one broke the pattern. That's how I noticed." Savio looked at the screen. Then he looked at Hester. "You work here." "Night auditor, 3rd floor." He tilted his head very slightly. "How long have you been standing in that doorway?" "Long enough to hear line 47. Priscilla exhaled. "She balances the building's accounts." Hester looked at her. "And you misread a notation system that's been documented in forensic accounting literature since 1987. Someone at the far end of the table disguised a sound as a cough. Savio leaned back in his chair. He was not laughing. He was not angry. He was deciding something. And Hester had the uncomfortable sensation that she had just become very visible to a man who noticed everything. "If you can decode this ledger correctly," he said, "I'll pay you $50,000. Hester looked at the projection, then at him. "I haven't agreed to try." "No." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "But you will." She disliked how accurate that was. She sat the coffee mug on the nearest flat surface, set her binder on an empty chair, and pulled the ledger toward her. 2 hours later, the table was quiet in a way it hadn't been before she walked in. Hester had reconstructed 7 misread entries. She identified a numbering system the experts had ignored entirely, a cross-reference notation that transformed apparent dates into account identifiers, and a recurring symbol that everyone else had classified as a printing artifact. It was not a printing artifact, it was a name. She read the relevant passage aloud, translating the shorthand line by line. Savio's expression remained unreadable throughout. She reached the final entry and stopped. "What?" he said. Hester looked up. "Your father's ledger describes a secondary account structure, one designed to operate after his death." She chose her next words with care. "And the notation here indicates that whoever managed it held co-authorization on the primary account while your father was still alive." The air in the room shifted. "That co-authorization," she continued, "required a second signature." Savio became very still. Hester looked at the faces around the table. There were 5 people on the other side of it. She didn't say what she was thinking. That the co-signatory's cipher appeared in 3 other places in the ledger, and that one of those locations corresponded to a document that had been face down on the table when she first walked in. She would think about that later. "Keep reading," Savio said. "I haven't finished." "I know." His voice was level. "That's why I said keep reading." By 10 the next morning, Savio Marchand knew everything a significant investment in private investigation could purchase about Hester Boyle. By 11, he understood considerably less than he expected. 33 years old, no criminal record, no unexplained income, no connections to rival organizations or anyone with an interest in the Marchand estate. She had grown up in Columbus, attended Ohio State on a full academic scholarship, and completed 3 years of a forensic accounting PhD program at Georgetown before withdrawing abruptly 5 years ago. His security chief placed the summary on his desk. "Medical records are sealed," but her mother's hospitalization paperwork wasn't difficult to locate. Lengthy illness, significant expenses. Savio turned a page. Her academic evaluations used words like exceptional and rigorous, and the kind of language that indicated her professors had expected her to become someone the field would cite for decades. There were 2 published papers in accounting history journals. One examined the evolution of private ledger notation in American banking families between 1940 and 1980. The other concerned cross-referential shorthand in mid-century estate planning documents. He read the second title twice. "Convenient," he said. "We checked." His security chief's definition of checked included bank statements, former landlords, property records for the house her mother had eventually lost, and her academic supervisor's correspondence files. Nothing connected Hester Boyle to the Marchand family. She had run out of money at the wrong moment, picked up work to cover her mother's bills, and stayed. She was finishing her dissertation part-time, he learned, submitting 1 chapter at a time between overnight shifts. Savio set the file down. He had expected to find a planted operative. He had found someone who had postponed becoming exactly the kind of expert he had been paying to hire. He found her that afternoon sorting files at the 3rd-floor audit desk. The 2 assistants nearby developed sudden and urgent interests in other rooms. She looked up. "You investigated me. You decoded a private family document in front of 5 retained specialists. So naturally, you needed to know if I was a spy." "I considered it." Hester straightened a stack of envelopes without particular urgency. "And your conclusion?" "That you have a dissertation chapter due in 3 weeks, and you've been working nights for 5 years to pay off a debt that wasn't yours to carry." Her hands stilled. "That's not a conclusion, that's a file." Its context, he placed a slim folder on the desk for an offer. She looked at the folder without touching it. She recognized the Georgetown seal visible on one photocopied page. "You had no right to pull those records." "I had every reason." "That isn't the same thing." He had not expected her to say that. He had also not expected it to be correct. "Your professors didn't describe your departure as a leave of absence," he said. "My professors weren't paying my mother's hospital bills." The answer arrived without heat, which made it more final than anger would have been. Savio looked at the dissertation title listed in the file. She'd been 4 months from completion. "You could return," he said. Hester gave him a look that suggested he'd said something both obvious and useless. "You say that like returning is a door I just forgot to open." He said nothing. She looked at the folder containing the version of herself other people had once expected her to become. Life doesn't wait for you to finish becoming who you planned to be. You just keep going from wherever you stopped. Savio stood with the uncomfortable awareness that this woman, who he had initially registered as a night shift employee, who happened to be in the wrong hallway, had just said something that required actual thought. He closed the folder. "I'm not here to evaluate you," he said. "I'm here because 12 more pages of that ledger haven't been decoded, and you identified structures my team missed entirely. I'm asking, not testing, not offering a prize." She heard the distinction. It mattered to her that he had made it deliberately. "I have conditions," she said. "I assumed. If I think you're wrong, I say so." "Noted. And if you try to override my interpretation without a reason, I'll tell you you're wrong twice." Something crossed his face that might have been the early formation of respect. "Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Hester picked up her pen. For the first time in 5 years, she was being hired for the part of herself she had spent 5 years pretending she had left behind. She signed. Savio's private offices occupied the top floor of Marchand Group's downtown building, and Hester spent the first 10 minutes of her consulting work passing through 3 security checkpoints before anyone offered coffee. The space looked nothing like what her general understanding of organized crimes suggested it should. There were no dramatic displays of anything. There were clean sight lines, polished concrete, precisely placed cameras, and employees who moved with the specific efficiency of people who understood that carelessness was costly. Savio found her in the secured document room, with the ledger already open under an archival lamp. "You're early," he said. "You're paying me by the hour. I expected that to make you stay later, not arrive sooner." She didn't look up. "Your understanding of incentives is fascinating." He took the chair across from her without a response, which she was beginning to recognize as not indifference but economy. He didn't say things that didn't need saying. It was, she acknowledged privately, a quality she found herself respecting more than she'd anticipated. "These 3 entries?" she said, pointing to a section flagged with a sticky note. "They weren't written at the same time as the rest of the ledger." Savio leaned forward. "They're in the same handwriting." "They're supposed to be." She angled the lamp. Under the warmer light, 2 of the 3 entries reflected slightly differently from the surrounding text. Different ink density. Could be a different pen, different day, different humidity. But look at the cross-reference markers. She showed him. Every other page used a consistent shorthand for transferring authority between accounts. Always placed before the account identifier, always in a specific sequence. In these 3 entries, the sequence was reversed. Someone who understood the vocabulary, she said, but not the habits of the original writer. Savio's attention sharpened. He was a man who could appear to be doing nothing while processing very quickly. "The entries redirect attention toward Del Court," he said, "your father's former business partner, who died 4 years ago. Convenient." She glanced at him. "I keep finding convenient things." She pulled the account identifier section forward. "In your father's notation system, each person's cipher uses a 4-part structure: person, authorization level, connected account, access scope." She pointed. "Delcourt's cipher in these 3 altered entries only has 3 parts. Savio's expression cooled. "The 4th part is missing. Or removed. The 4th identifier would tell us who else held co-authorization on the secondary account. Without it, the trail ends with a dead man." She paused. But I think we've been asking the wrong question from the beginning. He waited. We've been trying to decode what your father hid, she said. We should be asking who changed it after he wrote it. Dr. Jasper Albright arrived the following afternoon, carrying 2 reference binders and the easy confidence of a man who had spent 30 years being the most knowledgeable person in whatever room he entered. He was a financial historian, one of 4 people in the country, with published academic work on private coding systems in mid-century American estate documents. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Hester. "Boyle," he stared, "I heard you left the field." Hester looked up from the ledger. Something shifted briefly in her expression, the careful professional composure she wore in Savio's offices flickering into something warmer and less guarded. "Jasper," he laughed in genuine disbelief. "Professor Kellner still assigns your 1940s notation paper in his graduate seminar. Calls it the definitive entry on the subject." He shook his head. "I cannot believe you're here. What happened after Georgetown?" Hester started to answer. Savio, seated at the head of the table, closed the file he had been reviewing with the specific quietness of someone who had just decided to start paying a different kind of attention. Jasper finally seemed to remember the room he was standing in and turned to introduce himself properly. Savio shook his hand. His expression remained entirely pleasant. His security chief, standing near the door, watched the handshake with the focused neutrality of a man who had been asked to document things. The next morning, Hester arrived to find Savio reviewing a background report. She looked at the cover page. "You ran a check on Jasper. Dr. Albright is handling sensitive material. You reviewed his entire publication history." "Thoroughly." Savio turned a page without looking up. "His most recent paper is about notation systems in railroad trust accounts from 1955. He traveled to Boston 4 times last year. For the Newberry archive." Hester set her bag down slowly. "Are you jealous?" "No." The word arrived with remarkable speed. She smiled. He looked up. "Why are you smiling?" "No reason." That expression suggests a reason. So does commissioning a background check on a man whose greatest professional controversy was a disputed endnote in the Journal of Financial History. Savio returned to his report with the composure of a man who had decided this particular conversation was not occurring. Hester picked up her coffee and said nothing further, because she had learned over the past week that Savio Marchand was considerably more interesting when she let the silences do their own work. Jasper proved useful. He located a comparable notation system used by 2 estate law firms in New England during the same decade, which confirmed several of Hester's interpretations and resolved 2 entries she'd been uncertain about. By afternoon, they had isolated the altered section with precision. "The ink compound in these 3 entries," Jasper said, reviewing the imaging results, "became commercially available in a window between 9 and 13 years ago." Hester looked at the ledger. Delcourt had died 4 years ago. The alteration had been made while he was still alive, while he was still the natural suspect if anyone ever looked closely. She pulled Priscilla Dodd's original analysis notes from the folder Savio had provided. She compared them line by line against the altered section. Her hand slowed. "What?" Savio said. Hester placed Priscilla's notes beside the projected ledger page. "Priscilla's annotation for the second altered entry." She pointed. She marked the 3-part identifier as complete. She wrote full cipher, attribution confirmed. Jasper leaned in. She'd have to see the 4th part to know it was whole, or already know it wasn't there. Hester looked at Savio. In every other entry throughout this entire ledger, her notes flag incomplete identifiers as incomplete. She did it 11 separate times. She turned the page. For these 3 altered entries, she flagged nothing. Savio looked at the annotation, then at the ledger. then at nothing in particular for a long moment. She'd seen the document before, he said, or seen something that told her exactly what to expect. Hester kept her voice level. Either way, she didn't find the alteration. She worked around it. Priscilla Dodd arrived for the meeting the following morning, expecting a routine review update. She had not been told what the update concerned. Savio had arranged the room with quiet efficiency. Chairs placed, documents ordered, sight lines considered. Hester found that more unsettling than a raised voice would have been. Savio furious was a known quantity. Savio calm enough to plan a room, before walking someone into it, was something she didn't yet have a word for. Hester walked Priscilla through the findings without preamble. The altered entries, the ink discrepancy, the missing fourth identifier, and the pattern of Priscilla's own annotation notes, consistent across every section of the ledger, except the 3 that had been changed. Priscilla's expression didn't break. It adjusted, and Hester had been watching people's faces long enough to know the difference between surprise and recalculation. Annotation inconsistency proves nothing, Priscilla said. I may have read that section differently. You read it exactly the way someone would read it if they already knew the fourth identifier was gone, Hester said. The way you'd read it if you'd been told in advance what conclusion to reach. Savio's voice was almost conversational. Who told you? Priscilla's gaze moved to the door. 2 security staff stood outside the glass, visible and motionless. I was approached 8 months ago, she said finally, through a legitimate consulting referral. The client wanted a private assessment of an estate document before formal review was commissioned. Her voice stayed careful. I was shown a partial scan. I was paid for my interpretation. Which was that Delcourt held the secondary account authority. A pause. Which is what the ledger says, if you read it without the fourth identifier present. The name on the referral, Savio said. She hesitated, the smallest hesitation, but it was there. The engagement was routed through a holding company. I was given no direct contact name. The company, he said. She named it. Hester was already cross-referencing. She had been given access to the Marchand Group's internal financial records as part of her consulting scope, and she had spent 2 evenings finding things she hadn't specifically been instructed to look for. It was a habit she had developed in graduate school and never fully unlearned. She placed the relevant page on the table. That company received authorization payments from a Marchand internal fund. 18 months ago, and again 14 months ago. Savio looked at the authorization signature. For the first time since Hester had known him, his expression did something other than remain controlled. The signature belonged to Vernon Nault, 63 years old, former banking compliance officer. 17 years connected to Marchand interests, the last 11 working directly alongside Savio as his chief financial advisor. He had attended the original ledger review. He had stood directly behind Savio's chair when Hester first read the critical passage aloud. Savio set the document down carefully. That account requires internal dual authorization, he said quietly. Yes. Hester watched him. His signature is the primary. The secondary is a subsidiary fund controller. I can trace the secondary, but I wanted you to see this first. He was still looking at the signature. She understood what that stillness cost him. 17 years was not an abstraction. It had a specific weight, and she could see it settling into place. Finish the trace, he said. The final meeting was held 2 days later. Savio had invited everyone who had attended the original ledger review. He had not told any of them what had been found. Vernon Nault arrived in the same composed manner he brought to every Marchand Group meeting. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, carrying the expression of a man who considered his own competence a form of loyalty to the people he served. His gaze found Hester immediately. The building's auditor is still involved in this. Savio said nothing. Hester placed the full reconstruction on the display. She walked through it without rushing, starting from the notation system, moving through the altered entries, reaching the ink analysis and imaging results, ending with the financial trail. Vernon listened with his hands folded on the table. When she reached the authorization records, his hands stilled. "This is inference built on accounting interpretation," he said. "Private ledger notation is inherently subjective. You're constructing a criminal allegation from a shorthand dispute." "No," Hester said. "I'm constructing it from the shorthand dispute. The ink analysis, Priscilla's prior engagement records, the holding company payments, and your authorization signature on internal fund transfers to a company that paid someone to misread your employer's father's estate ledger." She set the final document on the table, and from this. She indicated the fourth identifier, the one that had been removed from the ledger, and which the imaging lab had partially recovered from the impression left in the paper beneath. The original cipher included your identifier in the secondary account structure. You co-authorized that account alongside Marchand Sr. When he died, you had unilateral access to it. She met his eyes. "You've been redirecting assets through it for 11 years. Vernon looked at Savio. "You're prepared to act on her interpretation?" "On the evidence," Savio said, "which she found. She's a night auditor." "She was." Savio rose. The room became very still. "She's also the reason you're sitting in that chair rather than receiving this information from a federal forensic team." Vernon's composure finally fractured. Not dramatically, but in the specific way of someone who has run out of moves and knows it. He looked once more at Hester, and what replaced the contempt in his expression was something colder and more honest. She held his gaze until he looked away. Savio turned to his financial director. "Freeze every account carrying a NOLT authorization. Compile the full transfer history. Send the complete package to legal, compliance, and our external forensic firm." He buttoned his jacket. "Every transaction gets traced." Vernon stared at him. "You think paperwork ends this?" "I think it ends your part in it," Savio said. "And I think you understand what documentation in the right hands means for everything else." Security stepped forward. The doors closed. 11 years of carefully layered misdirection had ended without a raised voice. Savio had chosen precision over the alternatives available to him, and everyone in the room understood that this had been a choice, not a constraint. Later, after the room had emptied, Hester stood at the window with her files still open. She heard Savio return to the doorway. "You suspected it was him before we finished the trace," he said. "I suspected." She didn't turn around. "I wanted the documentation complete before I said anything. That's not distrust." "I know what it is." He crossed the room. "It's the same reason I don't act before evidence is finished." Hester finally looked at him. "You could have handled this differently, the way your world usually handles it." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you were right from the beginning. And you were right because you looked at what was actually there instead of what was convenient." He paused. "I try not to work against the approach that's proven correct." Something in her chest shifted slightly. "I was wrong about you," he said. "The night you walked into that room, I was wrong about what you were." "You were wrong about what I was worth," she said. "That's more specific." "Yes." He said it without softening it, like a correction to an accounting error. "I apologize for that." Hester studied him. "That is actually an apology." "Did you expect otherwise?" "Most people negotiate the wording." "I was wrong," he said. "That's the wording." She accepted it. And something she had been quietly carrying since she was 28. The gradual sense of having become smaller than she was meant to be shifted toward the door and did not come back. 1 year later, Hester Boyle held a corner office at the forensic accounting firm she had joined after completing her dissertation in 7 months. The research she had produced during the Marchand case had become a methodology chapter used by 3 federal agencies and cited in 2 ongoing estate fraud proceedings. She had more clients than she could comfortably manage, and a waiting list her new assistant had insisted on creating. Savio had offered to fund a faculty position at Georgetown. She had declined before he finished the sentence. He had listened without arguing, which she had come to understand was the thing about him that mattered most. One evening she arrived at his office to find a cream-colored envelope waiting on his desk, addressed in handwriting she recognized as his. She opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page, a ledger entry, constructed in the same notation system she had spent the past year teaching him during the long evenings they had spent reconstructing his father's records. She read it twice, then she read it a 3rd time. Then she laughed. Sapio, who had been watching her from across the room with the particular stillness of a man who has done something irreversible and is not entirely certain about it, said, "Well? Your identifier placement is completely wrong," Hester said. "And you've used a continuation marker where you needed a cross-reference symbol." She set the page down. "This entry, as written, authorizes a freight transfer. Read what it says." I did. And she looked at the page. The notation was clumsy and technically incorrect in 4 places, and unmistakably clear. "I would like to spend the rest of my life being wrong in front of you." She looked at him. Savio Marchand, who did not display his uncertainty as a general practice, was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not composure, not calculation. Something considerably more exposed than either, and considerably more honest than most people ever got to see. She picked up her pen. "I have conditions," she said. I assumed. "We're correcting every notation error in this document before it goes anywhere near an archive." He crossed the room. "Is that a yes?" Hester handed him the pen. "It's a yes, with editorial revisions." She watched him take it, and she thought about the hallway a year ago, and the way she had nearly walked past Suite 7th and without stopping, and every version of herself she had once genuinely believed she had lost for good. "Also," she said, "your authorization marker is in the wrong column, which technically means you've just proposed to a shipping inventory." Savio looked down at the page for a long moment. "I've proposed to a freight commodity," he said. $11 million worth, Hester said. "Circa 1987. Honestly, given current inflation, it's not a bad offer." For the first time since she had known him, Savio Marchand laughed without reservation. Not the brief, controlled expression she had catalogued over the past year, but something unguarded and entirely real, and Hester thought that sound was worth considerably more than any figure she had ever audited. She signed beneath his notation in perfectly placed shorthand, dated it correctly, and handed it back to him. He pointed out that she had technically accepted a proposal from a freight inventory. She told him she had worked with worse clients. He told her she was going to spend the rest of her life fixing his notation. She said that was, in fact, among her conditions. And Savio Marchand, who had spent 41 years converting every weakness into leverage and every uncertainty into control, decided that being corrected by Hester Boyle was the one thing he had absolutely no interest in defending himself against.